Věra Chytilova's 1966 masterpiece, Daisies, is one of my favourite films. It's a complete mess of a feature, breaking cinematic rules they don't even teach in film school because they just assume they shouldn't have to. It's considered one of the main staples of the Czech New Wave, and I'm willing to bet it's the most popular film out of that era. But what makes this film so highly regarded? And why do I love it so much? From first glance, Daisies is a Dadaist film that uses absurd imagery to confuse and entertain an audience. This isn't necessarily wrong, but sometimes surrealist or Dadaist techniques are used simply to entertain. You could make a case that David Lynch uses surrealism in this way. Being confused or puzzled by something can be fun, so he uses this style to his advantage to make his films more entertaining. But behind the wacky, shifting colours, there is a message to the film that we will talk about in a bit. In the opening scene of Daisies, we see our main characters, Marie and Marie, sitting side by side looking bored as all hell. Their movements are stiff and lifeless, and their arms and legs creak as they move. They're like marionettes without strings, completely dull. Until they come to a realisation. If the world has gone bad, then we shall go bad as well.
Všechno se nám kazí na tom světě. Co všechno? Tak všechno. Na tom světě. Víš co? Když se všechno kazí, tak budeme kažené i my. Správně. Vadí. Nevadí.
The sequence that follows is suddenly in colour, and the characters have been dropped in a field with an apple tree placed in the centre frame. They begin to dance around the tree and eat the apples from it, a visual metaphor for Eve and the apple of knowledge. Suddenly, without any establishment, the characters are now in a flat, completely changing location without breaking up the flow of the scene. It is this sense of movement that makes Daisies so fun to watch, and it adds to this sense of chaos that the film achieves. In a lot of ways, this film is edited quite like a YouTube poop, or I guess YouTube poops are edited like Daisies. This opening scene is the jumping off point of the film and the reason the characters carry out the acts portrayed in the film. The motivation being as simple as, well, fuck it, society's a bit shit, so we might as well follow suit. In the following scene, the Maries enter a club, where they steal drinks and disrupt the performers. During this scene, the film used changes sporadically from monochrome to colour to tinted monochrome. This only makes the film more chaotic and carries on throughout the entire film. In later scenes, the film reel used changes mid-shot. What I love about this is that it's just manic for the sake of it. These editing choices almost parallel the actions these characters are taking. There are so many scenes in this film where the Maries are just sitting around eating food, including a scene where one of their boyfriends is rambling down the phone about how much he loves her, while they sit and eat bananas and sausages, cutting them up into pieces with scissors. I wonder what that could mean. It's pure indulgence, both in content and technique, because this was punk at the time. The Czech Republic was under a food crisis in the 1960s, so films where characters waste food and throw it around, it was considered too excessive. The sausages and bananas bit, and the last scene of the film with the food fight, contributed to this film being banned in the Czech Republic for a really long time. This message is on screen at the end of the film, a direct call out from Věra to the Czech government. It's in Czechoslovakian, but it means, this film is dedicated to those whose sole source of indignation is a trampled trifle. Got you, you fucking idiot. You thought this was going to be a politically neutral film analysis. Wrong! All jokes aside, you can't really talk about this film without talking about the feminist messaging. But Daisies isn't a Maid in Debenhams kind of feminist film, nor is it a Mulan sort of deal. In Daisies, the central characters are the villains of the film. Not really in a traditional sense. I mean, they're not really the villains. There isn't really a hero-villain dynamic in this film, so they can't really be the villains. But they do act fucking villainous. I mean, they steal, they cheat, break hearts like it's nobody's business. And the wacky part is, I mean, they get away with it. And sometimes they're thrown out of the club for getting a bit too wild, but that's about it. They never really face any karmic retribution for all the shit they pull. But why, I hear you shout from your smelly bedroom? Well, because they're young women in 60s Eastern Europe. Despite being of an adult age, they aren't seen as adults. They're seen and treated as children. Time and time again they trick older men into buying them expensive meals, and time again these men think they'll get something out of it, only to be put on a train to head home alone. Let's go back to the first scene. I mentioned earlier in the opening shot, Marie and Marie are stiff and lifeless, their limbs creaking like dolls before they find the tree and eat the fruit. I believe this is symbolic of how these women feel in a male-dominated society before realising that they can use society's view of them as young women to their own advantage. But the fact that the Maries can do whatever they want isn't the problem the film is trying to showcase. The goal of Daisies isn't to tell an audience, oh, women can do bad things and it's bad, oh my god. It's to point out the complete lack of respect men have for women. These two could kill someone in the street, and they'd still get phone calls from simps like, oh madame, I love you, Julie. Because no matter how many times they knowingly steal things or mistreat people, society's view of them is still, oh, they're just girls, they don't know any better. The complete lack of mutual respect from men causes them both to have an existential crisis of sorts. When they openly rob a gardener while he is watching them, and he doesn't do shit, he doesn't tell them off, he doesn't even acknowledge their presence, so they're forced to ask each other, if no one acknowledges us, then how do we know we exist? The end of the second act of the film becomes a bit of an exercise in the absurd, with the Maries constantly asking each other if things matter. They reply, no, to each other and laugh in response. And they start to realise that men begin to stop noticing them completely, which causes them to fall deeper into existential angst. But they conclude that since they are in each other's presence and they notice each other, then they must exist. The film carries on with the Maries expressing their love for each other, but instead of this turning into blue is the warmest colour, they cut each other up with scissors, a metaphor for something, I suppose. I'll let you interpret this on your own.
Avadí. Nevadí.
I really like this sequence, but by this point in the film I think Vera has sort of made her point. So there isn't really much meaning to draw from the third act. You could argue this is on purpose given the theme of existentialism introduced in the ending of the second act, but to be honest, I think they just wanted to end the film with some cool shit. You gotta end the film somehow. So the third act is more or less what we've already seen from the film, but bigger and even more indulgent. The film ends with the Maries breaking into a large dining hall where the food is ready for guests arriving, and they just throw it at each other and dance on the table because why not? No one's gonna stop them. Doesn't even matter. I consider this the end of the film. There's sort of a metaphorical epilogue scene where the Maries attempt to clean the dining hall. Afterwards they lie down on the table and insist on their own happiness because they're so hard working. After a pause, the left Marie says, it doesn't matter. And then the chandelier falls on them and they die? I'm not sure, it's kind of neat, but I consider this part more of an epilogue. I consider the real ending of the film the dining hall because it just fits better. Part of this whole ending of the film kind of feels like it was shoved in by the producers just so they wouldn't get too shafted by the Czech government. You know, they had to kind of end it with sort of a moral if that makes sense. It doesn't really fit in the film. I feel like it would have been much better if it just ended, like, with the dining hall scene. But that's just me. In conclusion, I love this film. It's a complete shitpost in the best way possible. I love how cold-hearted the Maries are. Like, they're truly fucking awful, but they're also really fun. They're the kind of people you'd meet at a party and enjoy talking to, but never want to meet again because they'd probably ruin your fucking life.